I still remember the exact way the fluorescent lights buzzed that afternoon. They flickered slightly, as if even the electricity knew what was about to happen. I sat at the long glass conference table in the HR office of Gentex Systems, a company I had dedicated 20 years of my life to. Across from me, Bradley Morton, the newly appointed CEO, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed casually. Beside him, Karen Whitmore from Human Resources fiddled with a stack of folders. "Amanda, thank you for meeting with us," Karen began, forcing a tight smile. "As you know, Gentech is shifting its focus to emerging technologies. After a thorough review, we have decided to eliminate several senior positions, including yours." The words floated over the table, detached and cold. I nodded slowly, not surprised. I had sensed it for weeks, ever since the young faces started replacing familiar ones on my project teams, ever since Bradley had made casual comments about fresh energy and modern leadership. Karen slid a manila envelope across to me. I did not touch it. "You will receive a severance package, continued health coverage for 3 months, and a recommendation letter highlighting your contributions," she continued. I gave a small nod. "Of course," I said evenly. Bradley's eyes searched my face, maybe hoping for tears, outrage, maybe even begging, but I stayed composed. I had prepared for this moment the day I accidentally received an internal email chain outlining the strategic sunset plan for legacy employees. Legacy employees. That was me. Legacy. Like an old piece of software ready to be deleted. Bradley coughed awkwardly, then added, "We ask that you vacate your office by Friday." I nodded again, stood up, and shook both their hands, my expression polite, neutral, unreadable. "Thank you," I said simply, and turned to leave. As I walked back through the halls of Gentex Systems, past the glass-walled conference rooms and the open floor plans buzzing with younger voices, I felt no anger, only clarity. They thought they were erasing me. What they did not know was that I had already been writing my future long before they decided to erase my past. I spent the rest of that Wednesday clearing my office. There was something almost sacred about packing 20 years of memories into a single cardboard box. Photographs of my 2 children tucked into picture frames, now both grown. Certificates of appreciation from leadership teams who no longer worked here. A small ceramic cactus a former intern had given me as a joke after I successfully navigated a brutal project deadline. I wrapped each item carefully, methodically, almost reverently. Every few minutes someone would pass my door, slow down, then speed up again. They did not know what to say. Maybe they thought saying nothing was kinder. Maybe they simply did not want to be associated with someone the company had deemed obsolete. I understood. I did not blame them. But what none of them knew, not Bradley, not Karen, not the dozens of new hires who never even learned my name, was that I had already begun preparing my next chapter months ago. Last October, while reviewing our internal code repositories, I had noticed something troubling. A major project, one that would reshape Gentech's entire business model, was being built on the core software architecture I had designed 5 years earlier. Only now, the new teams were modifying it without fully understanding its foundations. They were rushing, patching, taking shortcuts. I knew where it would lead: instability, crashes, failure, and I also knew how to fix it. So late at night, on weekends, and on vacations, using my own personal equipment and separate Git repositories, I began designing a better system. A new architecture, cleaner, faster, more resilient. I documented every step, every improvement, carefully time-stamped and backed up. No one at Gentech ever knew, because it was not theirs. It was mine. Around the same time, I had reached out quietly to Ethan Brooks, the CEO of Orion Solutions, one of Gentech's emerging competitors. We had met years ago at an industry conference and had kept in loose contact. When I hinted that I might soon be available, he responded almost immediately. A meeting, then another, then detailed discussions about technology roadmaps and shared visions. By the time Karen slid that manila envelope across the table, my future was already halfway built. I was not angry as I packed my box. I was not bitter as I handed in my badge. I was not broken as I turned in my company laptop. I was ready. When I reached the parking garage, I placed the box in the back seat of my car and sat for a moment behind the wheel, breathing in the scent of leather and familiarity. I had driven to this building every day for 2 decades. It had seen me through pregnancies, promotions, sleepless nights during product launches, heartbreaks, and small victories. Now, it was simply a building. Buildings could be left behind, people could be left behind. Ideas, though, ideas traveled. As I pulled out of the garage and onto the busy streets of San Diego, the city unfolded before me like a map I had not truly studied in years. Possibility buzzed in the air like a low electric hum. It vibrated against my skin, a reminder that I was still here, still building, still dreaming. I was not finished. I was just getting started. And by the time they realized what they had lost, it would be far too late. Friday arrived faster than I expected. When I turned in my keycard at the security desk, the guard, a man named Luis who had greeted me every morning for years, looked genuinely sad. "Good luck, Miss Collins," he said quietly, avoiding eye contact. I smiled, the kind of smile you give when you are holding 1,000 unspoken words inside, and thanked him. The sun was bright that morning as I drove across town to a different building, one that buzzed with a very different kind of energy, Orion Solutions, my new home. As I pulled into the parking lot, Ethan Brooks himself was waiting at the entrance, sleeves rolled up, a wide grin on his face. "Welcome aboard, Amanda," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "No NDAs to sign today?" I teased lightly. He laughed. "Only if you promise not to build something so brilliant that even I do not understand it." Inside, Orion Solutions was a world apart from the rigid, polished corridors of Gentech. It was messier, livelier, younger but not disrespectful. The walls were covered in whiteboards filled with sketches and ideas. The cafeteria smelled like fresh coffee and possibility. I was shown to a corner office with wide windows overlooking the harbor. It was smaller than my old office, but somehow grander. It did not feel like a reward. It felt like a launch pad. The rest of the day passed in a blur of introductions and meetings. Ethan moved quickly. He wanted me to head a new division focused on next-generation data architecture. He had reviewed my designs. He believed in them. More importantly, he believed in me. By late afternoon, as the California sun dipped low against the Pacific, Ethan called me into a quiet meeting room. "We want to roll out your system within 6 months," he said. "Aggressive, I know, but the market's ripe. Gentech has made some interesting choices lately." I knew exactly what he meant. Without even touching my old work, Gentech had tried to rebuild it. "But you cannot rebuild a house when you do not understand the foundation," Ethan continued. "We also want to offer positions to a few key engineers you might recommend, if you know anyone who is feeling underappreciated." I thought of the team I had left behind at Gentech. Brilliant minds pushed aside for cheaper, younger hires. Loyal colleagues abandoned in the name of profit margins. "I know exactly who to call," I said. That evening I sat on my small balcony overlooking the harbor, a glass of wine in hand and my laptop open. I drafted 6 emails. Personal, heartfelt, simple. Subject line, New Horizons. Message, I have found a place where innovation still matters, where experience is valued. If you are ready for something better, call me. I hit send. The stars were beginning to appear one by one in the deepening sky. It reminded me that endings are not always dark. Sometimes they are just the beginning of something you never thought you deserved but fought for anyway. Somewhere inside me, a quiet voice whispered, "You are exactly where you are meant to be." And for the first time in a very long time, I believed it. By Monday morning my phone buzzed with replies. All 6 engineers I had reached out to responded. Every single one of them said yes. Some were hesitant at first, needing reassurances about Orion's stability, its leadership, its vision. I answered their questions honestly. I told them what I had seen, what I had built, and what I planned to do. By Wednesday, all 6 had formally resigned from Gentech. It caused more disruption than I had anticipated. Miguel, the lead data architect, was responsible for maintaining the legacy systems that the new management had largely ignored. Paige, the senior UX designer, had been the bridge between engineering and product teams. Thomas, Laura, Raj, and Samantha rounded out the circle with their critical roles across infrastructure, security, testing, and support. When they left, they did not just leave gaps. They tore holes straight through Gentech's operational core. Miguel texted me updates during his final days at the company. "They're panicking," he wrote late Thursday afternoon. "Bradley tried to offer me a 20% raise to stay. I told him it was not about the money anymore." That night, as I sat again on my balcony under the velvet sky, I realized something important. This was not revenge, not really. It was justice. Simple, clean, unglamorous. The slow, inevitable collapse that happens when you build a castle on sand and ignore the hands that once shaped its stones. Meanwhile, Orion Solutions moved fast. Ethan secured funding for a major project launch tied directly to my architecture. He assembled a marketing team to quietly hint to industry insiders that something revolutionary was coming. The first whispers began within a week. An article appeared in a small tech newsletter, then another in a larger business journal. A few subtle headlines. At Gentech, Bradley tried to spin the mass resignations as a planned realignment during a quarterly meeting, but few believed him. Morale cratered. Recruiters struggled to fill the vacant roles because the industry was buzzing about Gentek's instability. One evening, as I walked through the harbor with Ethan discussing project timelines, he turned to me and said, "You know, it is not just about beating them, it is about building something they could never even dream of." I nodded slowly, feeling the truth of his words deep in my chest. It was never enough to walk away from betrayal. You had to walk toward something bigger, brighter, stronger. Toward the future they could not even imagine. Toward the future they had once underestimated, sitting right across from them at a long glass table. Now I was no longer sitting at their table. I was building my own. And the invitations would be mine to send. 2 weeks after I left Gentek, the first public sign of trouble appeared. A major client, Wexler Financial, quietly pulled out of a multi-year contract renewal, citing concerns about platform stability. Another client, a mid-sized healthcare network, began exploratory talks with Orion Solutions. I heard about both through industry friends, whispers passed along in cautious emails and quiet phone calls, the kind of news that spreads slowly at first, like hairline fractures along glass. But once the cracks appeared, it was only a matter of time before the entire surface shattered. At Orion we moved faster. Our team, small but fierce, had spent nights and weekends finalizing the first iteration of our new system, internally dubbed Project Nova. It was sleek, robust, future-proofed in ways Gentek's aging infrastructure could never hope to match. Ethan's marketing team crafted a brilliant launch strategy: subtle leaks, controlled teasers, strategic demos to key industry insiders. By the start of the third week, the buzz was undeniable. I was invited to speak on a panel at an industry conference in San Francisco titled "The Future of Enterprise Architecture." It was the kind of event Gentek had once dominated, parading their innovations and achievements. Now it would be Orion Solutions stepping onto that stage. I hesitated at first, wondering if it would seem petty, too pointed. But Ethan, always sharper than he let on, reassured me. "It is not about them," he said. "It is about the industry knowing where the real innovation is happening." And so I agreed. Meanwhile, Miguel continued feeding me quiet updates from former colleagues still at Gentek. "They pulled the senior management team into a 3-hour emergency meeting yesterday," he texted one afternoon. Bradley looked like he aged 10 years. Apparently the executives had finally realized that without the core team that had built and maintained their critical systems, they were adrift. The new hires, bright and eager though they were, simply did not have the institutional knowledge to keep the ship steady. To make matters worse for Gentek, a third major client froze payments pending an internal audit of Gentek's technology roadmap. They wanted assurances that the systems they relied on would not crumble underneath them. Assurances Gentek could not provide. I did not gloat. I did not celebrate. But late at night, as I sat by my window and watched the city lights flicker and glow against the velvet sky, I allowed myself a small smile. This was not revenge. This was balance. The slow, inevitable correction that comes when you rip the roots from a tree and are surprised when the canopy falls. In the middle of all this, an unexpected email arrived in my inbox. It was from Bradley. Subject line: request for discussion. The message was terse, professional. "Amanda, I would appreciate the opportunity to discuss a potential consulting arrangement. We value your historical knowledge of our systems and believe there may be mutual benefit." I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling nothing but a distant, almost clinical amusement. I forwarded the email to Ethan without replying. His response came swiftly. "Funny how the tune changes when the music stops." We decided not to respond immediately. Better to let Gentek twist in the winds they had summoned themselves. Because this was only the beginning. The real storm was still coming. 3 days after Bradley's email, it happened. Gentek's quarterly earnings call, normally a predictable, boring exercise, turned into a public relations disaster. I did not watch it live. I did not need to. The aftermath flooded every tech news feed by evening. Analysts grilled Bradley about declining client confidence, delayed product updates, and most notably, the sudden departure of key engineering personnel. His answers were vague, defensive, filled with phrases like strategic pivots and temporary realignment, but the market saw through it. Gentek's stock price tumbled by nearly 12% before the market even closed that day. Within hours, internal documents leaked to the press, revealing stalled projects, rising support ticket volumes, and missed SLAs with major enterprise clients. The story spread like wildfire. Gentek stumbles amid leadership turmoil and brain drain. Once a tech darling, Gentek struggles to maintain its grip. Sources blame exodus of senior engineers for system failures. And though my name was never mentioned directly, the undercurrent was obvious. Insiders whispered about a certain team that had left, about a certain architect whose quiet departure had left a gaping hole no one seemed able to fill. Meanwhile, Orion Solutions seized the moment. Ethan's team launched a strategic announcement. Orion would unveil Project Nova at the San Francisco Tech Future Summit next month. Rumors swirled that it was a game-changing platform, faster, safer, and more scalable than anything Gentek currently offered. Behind closed doors, Ethan and I finalized the first licensing agreements with 2 Fortune 500 clients. Clients who, 6 months earlier, would have signed renewals with Gentek without blinking. Now they wanted innovation, they wanted stability, they wanted what we were building. I found myself working longer hours than ever, but it felt different. No longer grinding against a system that undervalued me, no longer pouring energy into people who would take my ideas and claim them as their own. Now, every late night, every brainstorm session, every whiteboard filled with diagrams and notes was building something I believed in, something I would be recognized for, something with my name woven into its foundation. Late one evening, after a marathon design session with the new engineering team, I sat alone in the main conference room looking out at the glittering city skyline. I thought about the years I had spent at Gentek, the promotions they dangled like carrots, the awards handed out at stiff company dinners, the hollow promises that loyalty would be rewarded. And then I thought about this moment, the quiet satisfaction, the stillness inside me, the certainty that I had not just survived, I had risen. My phone buzzed. Another message from Miguel. Bradley called another emergency meeting. Word is the board's furious, investors are threatening to walk. I smiled, not out of malice but out of a quiet, almost solemn acknowledgement. The cracks were no longer hidden, they were wide open for the world to see. And the future, it was mine to write. The San Francisco Tech Future Summit was bigger than I remembered. The convention center pulsed with energy. Booths for every major player lined the halls, sleek banners fluttering, executives in sharp suits hustling from panel to panel. But there was only one name on everyone's lips that morning, Orion Solutions, and the mysterious Project Nova they were about to reveal. I stood backstage with Ethan and our team, the muffled murmur of the crowd buzzing beyond the heavy curtain. Ethan placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "Ready to change the conversation?" he asked, smiling. I nodded, steadying my breath. This was not fear. This was focus, a calm certainty that came from months of preparation and years of unrecognized labor finally finding its voice. The announcer's voice echoed over the loudspeaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Amanda Collins, Chief Innovation Officer at Orion Solutions." Applause thundered through the hall as I walked into the spotlight. I blinked once at the brightness, then raised my eyes to meet the crowd. Hundreds of faces watched me. Investors, journalists, engineers, former colleagues, some of them from Gentek sitting stiffly in the third row. I smiled. "Good morning," I began, my voice clear and steady. "Today I am honored to introduce you to a new way of thinking about enterprise architecture. A system designed not just for where businesses are but for where they are going." Behind me the screen lit up with the sleek pulsing logo of Project Nova. I walked them through the innovations. Data pipelines optimized for self-healing. Security frameworks built on zero-trust principles. Real-time adaptive scaling for unpredictable workloads. A system that learned, evolved, and protected itself. Every slide, every demonstration was met with nods, murmurs of approval, the frantic scribbling of notes. At one point, someone even whistled low under their breath after a particularly bold benchmark was displayed. As I neared the end of the presentation, I paused, letting the silence settle. "For too long," I said, "companies have treated innovation as a thing to be extracted, not nurtured. They have valued appearances over substance, speed over strength. Today, that changes." Another burst of applause. I finished to a standing ovation. When I returned backstage, Ethan was grinning from ear to ear. "You just rewrote the narrative," he said simply. By lunchtime, tech blogs exploded with coverage. Orion's Nova, a wake-up call to the industry. Amanda Collins emerges as the architect behind a new era of software innovation. Gentek's loss is Orion's triumph. That last headline made me pause for a moment, not out of cruelty, but because it was so rare to see the truth printed so plainly. By evening, industry analysts were predicting a major market shift within 6 months. Several of Gentek's mid-tier clients contacted Orion's sales team requesting immediate demos. Investors began reshuffling portfolios, pouring money into Orion stock, pulling it from Gentek's sagging shares. The storm had broken, and it was not just rain falling on Gentek now, it was a flood. At Orion's private celebration dinner that night set high above the city in a glittering rooftop restaurant, Ethan stood and tapped his glass for attention. "I want to make a toast," he said, raising his champagne, "to Amanda Collins, the mind that changed everything." I stood slowly, feeling the eyes of my new colleagues on me, warm and full of respect. "I spent a lot of years thinking I had to fight for a seat at the table," I said softly. "But maybe the real power comes from building your own table. And inviting the right people to join you." The room erupted in cheers. As I sipped my champagne and looked out over the sprawling city lights, one thought settled gently in my mind. I had not just survived. I had become something stronger, something undeniable, and somewhere across town, in a boardroom filled with panicked executives, they were finally realizing what they had lost. But by then, it was far, far too late. 3 months later I stood once again at a podium, but this time under vastly different circumstances. The National Technology Leadership Conference was being held in Chicago, and the keynote speaker this year was me. I glanced down at the sleek white card in my hand. It was simple, elegant. It bore only my name, my new title, and the phrase, Innovator of the Year. I never thought I would be here. Not really. For so many years recognition had seemed like something reserved for others. The louder ones, the younger ones, the ones who knew how to polish their narratives better than they built their products. But now, the truth was undeniable. The work spoke for itself. Project Nova had already signed licensing deals with 12 major corporations. Orion Solutions' market valuation had doubled since the launch. Gentek's stock, meanwhile, continued to slide. Bradley Morton had quietly resigned. New management had stepped in, promising a return to core values. But the damage was done. Trust, once lost, is not so easily repaired. As I took the stage that evening, the crowd rose to their feet. It was a surreal moment, like walking through a dream you had barely allowed yourself to hope for. When the applause faded, I leaned slightly into the microphone. "I want to tell you a story," I began, my voice steady. "A story about building things that last, about the importance of valuing the hands that create, not just the hands that sell." I told them about the years spent behind the scenes, solving problems no one saw, patching holes no one admitted existed. I spoke of the quiet sacrifices, of the meetings where my voice had been ignored, only to hear my ideas repeated by someone else minutes later. I spoke about the day they told me I was no longer needed. And then, I spoke about what came after. "Leaving was not the end," I said softly. "It was the beginning, because sometimes being pushed out is not a defeat. Sometimes it is a door you did not know you needed to walk through." I finished to another standing ovation. But this time I stayed still for a moment, just soaking it in, not for vanity, not for revenge, but for the simple, powerful truth that acknowledgement, real acknowledgement, matters. After the ceremony, as people mingled and networked in the wide banquet hall, a young woman approached me. She was maybe 25, with a notebook clutched tightly to her chest. "Miss Collins," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "your story, it changed how I see my own work. I used to think that if no one noticed what I built it did not matter, but now I know better." I smiled and placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Never wait for permission to believe in yourself," I said. "Build anyway, create anyway, and protect your work. It matters even when no one is watching." She nodded, her eyes shining. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I sat by the window watching the city lights sparkle below. It would have been easy to feel vindicated, easy to savor the downfall of those who once dismissed me, but that was not what filled my heart. What filled it was something quieter, something deeper, peace. I had not needed to destroy anyone to rise, I had only needed to build, patiently, relentlessly, faithfully, because success built on bitterness crumbles, but success built on truth endures. I closed my eyes, breathing in the soft hum of the city night, and let it all settle. At 53 years old, I was not just beginning again, I was exactly where I was meant to be. Not because someone else allowed it, not because someone else recognized it, but because I had dared to believe, even when they did not, that my work, my mind, and my voice had value. And now, the world finally saw it too.